Hey Cupcakes, Lisa here, and I'm back. I'm back on the Oregon coast where it's beautiful. I'm here to spend New Year's, and the weather's looks like the sun has come out. It's supposed to be sunny tomorrow. Already been for a long walk on the beach. The ocean is just it's just massaging my soul to hear the waves and to feel the spray. And 2018 has been a freaking intense year. It's been a beautiful year, a growthful year, an exhausting year, a hard year, a year of real loss and a year of gain. It's been the full Monty, the whole smorgasbord. There have been some decks that have really made their place in my heart indelibly marked. So in my top 5, which is really more like my top 10 because I'm cheating and I have some ties for each of these, not for each of them, but for many of the ranks in the 5. In my top 5-ish decks, I have a mix. I have a mix of decks that were just released this year, so they're brand new, and some of them have been talked about an awful lot. There's lots of videos, lots of reviews out there, and they're decks that are new to me. A couple of decks that are vintage decks that I just discovered this year, and I've talked a fair amount about some of these. And then there's a couple of decks that I've had in my collection for a little while, one of which I just kind of fell in love with this year all over again, and the other it's just the deck I return to again and again, the deck that is kind of has gotten under my skin in a way that as each year goes by, that becomes even more clear and true to me. Okay. Yeah. Let's just dive in. Hopefully it's a good mix of decks and not too many repetitions with what other folks are sharing. But you know, when we repeat each other, I mean, it's fun too. It's all fun. It's all good. Okay. In place number 5 is a deck that absolutely had to be one of my favorite decks, no matter what. I grew up in the 80s. I mean, I came of age in the 80s, graduated from high school in the 80s, graduated from college in the 80s, oh boy. Yeah, David Bowie, man. Starman Tarot. You know, Bowie, what can I say? I mean, there's the innocence, creativity, freakitude, theatricality, sense of adventure, sense of the aesthetic, sense of danger, sense of beauty. I mean, everything. Bowie, everything was in Bowie. Everything. And the whole range of Bowie, the way he kept reinventing himself. So the image of the alien, the Starman, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, or the alien and the man who fell to Earth. The image of the alien who is an angelic being, too good for this world, the sort of like Jesus, Buddha, you know, like that side of Bowie, man. I'm waxing really inarticulate. It just, you know, as I'm talking to you, I wish I could sing because like the song Heroes is going through my head. David Bowie was the soundtrack of my coming of age. So the deck, I think the deck is brilliant. David DeAngelis, I wish he had been able to self-publish this deck and have the production quality match his vision. One thing I will say, the quality of the images, if not the card stock, is exquisite. And I own 3 copies of this deck. I own 2 copies. This is I think it's called I want to say it's called the Deluxe, but it's just the regular, you know, I got it in the kit form, which has been marked down ridiculously. It went down from like $30 to $16 on Amazon. This, by the way, is one of my favorite images. This is the 4 of Swords, and it's that meditative Buddhist Bowie, right? In the, what do you call it? In the like limited edition version, the one that was really expensive and is totally not worth the money, there is an alternate Starman card. Starman is like the Fool, and it's also got that kind of meditative pose. This is my bag for the deck. So there's something about that. Bowie in repose. And, you know, DeAngelis is just, he worked with Bowie late in Bowie's career. He's a designer. He himself, sort of that kind of Bowie with Brian Eno moment, both early in Bowie's career and then late in Bowie's career. That kind of trippy quality, I don't know if I can even put this into words. These cards are deeply textured with image and color, and yet, unlike something like, you know, the Tarot Illuminati, is that what it's called? The Eric Dunn cards, or the Tarot of the Apocalypsis, which are not decks that I particularly like. The texturing of the images doesn't ever feel to me busy or overdone. It's a kind of collage style that I find I don't, you know, I can meditate on the images, but I don't have to. I can sort of take in the gestalt and I don't feel overwhelmed. It's like listening to music. It's beautiful. And just the colors, oh my God. You know, people have complained about the backs of the decks as being kind of boring, but I think in the regular kit version, I really like the pink. The deluxe version, which is not deluxe, the limited edition version, which is big and gilded, I think it's almost too much. So this deck deserves a review of its own, of course, and I haven't really worked with it all that much. You know, I don't adore all of the cards. A card that I really don't like, for instance, is the Magician, if I even can find it, which is unfortunate because it's kind of an important card. But I love it to pieces. And the book, which I haven't read all of, but what I have read is really smart and good. And I love what he says here. He talks about kintsugi pottery, that the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, silver, or platinum, which is a Japanese art form. He says, I'm totally fascinated by the process of turning something perceived as damaged into something of increased beauty and value. And he's talking in this context about both the collage nature of the art and then also the way in which he embellished and worked on this deck over the years. So, in fifth place, Starman Tarot. People have complained, by the way, about the cardstock. You know, it's fine. It's Lo Scarabeo, and it reminds me a little bit of the Healing Light Tarot, which is actually another one of my, it's not one of my top 5, but it's another deck that I acquired this year that I really like. But it has that kind of glossy cardstock. It's bendy. It's not the yummiest of cardstock, but it's quite usable, and I think it's quite shuffleable. And the kit size version of this deck, the cards are big, but not too big. So, Starman Tarot, number 5. Okay, moving along to number 4. So number 4 is the Folio Tarot by artist Jen May and author Jess Crispin, who wrote the book Creative Tarot. She's a writer. She's coming sort of to tarot. She has her own history with tarot, but she's not coming from within the tarot world. She's coming from the world of publishing. It's a collage deck, and it's actually a Minchiati deck, basically. Oh my God, this deck. First of all, the cardstock is that what Simon has been calling rose petal, but that sort of slightly rubberized cardstock. Not as thick as the Brady Tarot, which I'll be talking about in a moment. Spoiler alert. Spolia alert. Not as thick as the Brady Tarot, which actually makes it a little bit more usable. But, you know, as a Minchiate deck, freaking huge. I mean, you know, there are 97 cards in this deck. Yeah, and the little white book is quite usable. I like how she says Spolia, first edition. So, you know, expecting it to come out in multiple editions. So this Spolia, I call it Spolia. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that word. But Spolia or Spolia are what Jen May and Jess Crispin used that name for this deck because it's a collage deck and the word means rubble that's used for building materials. So it's that idea of a deck that takes discarded bits and turns them into art. So you'll see, like, these are the Zodiac, because again, this is a Minchiate deck. I don't love all the images. The image I love the most is the world. I pretty much love the deck as a whole, even if I don't love all the images. And then, you know, it's just really readable. I think Jess Crispin represents this, look at the devil, this trend in modern tarot as it gets kind of brought into mainstream art. I'm sorry, did I call this the world? This is the Sun card. As it gets drawn into mainstream art. That is just really cool. I mean, we're just in a whole, I love the Hierophant, in a whole new world. So I find this deck really readable. I find it, to shuffle it is quite a challenge, but I'm used to breaking my cards into, my decks into pieces, like chunks of 2 and 3 and 4 to shuffle them better. It's very simple, you know, it manages, it's like sort of the opposite impulse of this kind of collage. You know, so David DeAngelis creates these seamless wholes that are very complex. These are much simpler. So their unity is easier to grasp. And I think what makes this deck so delicious is not just the imagery. That's what makes a deck like the Starman so yummy, but the way the imagery blends with the production quality of the deck itself. So, oh, I gotta see this Page of Cups. So the Spolia or Spolia, maybe it's Spolia Tarot. Okay. Jess Crispin and Jen May. Deck number 4. Deck number 3. Okay, this is a 3-way tie. Although leading with the Tarot de Maria Celia, Leonard Jim Narciso's deck. Whoops, a little tiger eye crystal in it. This, in third position, are the scrumptious Tarot de Marseille that have been rocking my world this year. So, you know, you've seen this deck. Oh, look at that death. I mean, you know, I'm learning more and more about Leonard Jim Narciso and his art. You know, he's a Filipino artist. And I mean, this is the guy who's behind the Vanessa Tarot, which is not a deck I own or a deck that I'm drawn to in any way. And I keep wanting to be drawn to it because I'm drawn to the Tarot de Maria Celia so much, and to his other decks, which I don't own. I've just looked at online on his website and Paralumen Studios. You know, this is a man whose art just stylistically can do so much, and that, you know, when he goes into the universe of tarot and the universe of Lenormand, the colors aren't so true, I think. It just, he can go all over the place. What I love about this deck, you know, it's just so, chubby and yummy and cute, and you know, his kings are so sweet, his courts are so sweet, and the colors are just, they're just delicious. You know, the way he puts these little stars in the back of cards like the Hermit, or where was that other one? Was it? Well, it picks up on the sort of the dots in the Maison Dieu or Tower, but a card like, I think it was Justice. Oh, well, it's in Death too. I mean, it's just, it's sweet. It's sweet without being cutesy. It's sweet in a way that makes the Tarot de Marseille just makes you want to read it. And it's sweet in a way that the Marshmallow Tarot is also sweet. So this is the second edition of the Marshmallow Tarot, which is my number 2. Just looking at my notes here. Okay, so I got all flummoxed because I was putting in category number 3 what actually had been in category 2, which were all my Tarot de Marseilles. But I think they're okay in category number 3. 3, 2, 2, 3. What's in a number? Says the person who reads tarot for a living. Okay, what's in a number? Your future, your present, your past. Okay, I am babbling. Marshmallow Tarot, the second edition. The first edition I think came out last, it was 2017. The second edition, I have both, I love it even more. I love the holographic backs. The cardstock is, well, they're both lovable. The cardstock on this isn't quite the linen finish of the first edition, but it feels a little sturdier. And in fact, I bent one of the cards in the first edition. What do I love about this deck? First of all, it's by a Mexican, designed by Wandering Oracle, a Mexican filmmaker named Jorge Cuac, C-U-A-I-K. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name. You know, it's a remake of, I believe, an 18th century French deck. And, you know, on the website for it, you know, he calls it the Marshmallow Tarot because it's so sweet. And it is. I mean, my all-time favorite card in the deck, the Popus, right? I mean, it's just the colors, the borderlessness, the titles written in the side, the sweet expressions, like the Tarot de Maria Celia. It has a sweetness to it. The card format, the sort of bridge size, or maybe it's poker size deck, makes these feel more approachable. These are Tarot de Marseille decks that have won over people who are not Tarot de Marseille types. Look at that Justice. It's not, I love this deck. I don't love it as much as the Tarot de Maria Celia. It's not as readable to me. It's not that it's not as readable. It's not as evocative, but it's lovely. I love it. I love it. I had to resist buying a third copy, which, you know, how crazy is that? Like, backup copies, that whole concept. Third place in my Tarot de Marseille cards is the Fournier edition of the Tarot de Marseille. So this originally came out in, I have to look at my notes, I want to say 1983. Yep, 1983. I don't know who the artist is. It came out from Fournier, the Spanish tarot deck, playing card deck company. And what I love about this, you know, the Spanish tarot is probably my all-time favorite kind of Tarot de Marseille. That deck, which I just so happen to have with me, you know, that also is a 1980s deck. Both of these are vintage. Both of these you can get, the Spanish Tarot and the Fournier Tarot de Marseille. They're both Fournier decks. Fournier, I don't know quite how to pronounce them. Both you can get in print. Both have these, how do I want to, so these are thinner than, certainly smaller than the kind of Starman Tarot I'm looking to see if I have a regular US Games size card. So they're thinner and smaller, and that format is really sweet. The cardstock on the vintage, like this Spanish Tarot, it's really, really delicious cardstock. The Spanish Tarot also has, you know, this color scheme that is totally unique, totally unbelievable, just delicious, delightful. I mean, look at that star card. It's just, it's an unbelievable deck. That's the Spanish Tarot is my all-time favorite Tarot de Marseille for the color, for the cardstock, especially in the vintage version. But I've really this year been in love with the Fournier, which has this color coding in the suits, and the sort of additional depth of shading and sensitivity in the faces of the figures. It's still got the traditional French names, but it's just made more gentle and more readable through shading and coloration. I've used this deck over and over this year for some really accurate Tarot de Marseille readings. I think I got it sometime in March, and it's just been on my reading table all year. I love it. And I tend now to use it more than the Spanish Tarot. It's the Tarot de Marseille that I reach for when I'm going for a very traditional reading. This is the Tarot de Marseille that ends up in my purse. This is the one that hangs out on my desk. Okay, so that was number 3, my Tarot de Marseille. In place number 2, these are all vintage decks in place number 2, not a single deck that came out this year. The first I won't say much about because I just did a video about it, and I still haven't worked with it much because I don't have a bag for it yet. That's the rule in the Lisa household, the Lisa Tarot household. You need to get your custom bag before you can actually start to work with your decks. I don't know if any of you have superstitions like that, but this is the Tarot of Reflections. And I mean, just look at that High Priestess. There's something in this category now, my number 2 category for 2018. There's something in a certain kind of vintage deck that just knocks my socks off. Knocks my socks off? Is that yeah, that's the expression. This sort of ethereal, dreamlike quality where the artwork takes me to, it takes me to a dream landscape, a very gentle dream landscape. And ethereal, I mean, that's just the word that keeps coming back for me. There's a delicacy to this deck, Tarot of Reflections. Now, this is a deck I haven't worked with yet. It's just a deck that I've held in my hot little hands, just look at those, just look at those colors. That I've held in my hot little hands, that I've like drooled over. I don't know how it's going to read, but I can already tell from the quartz that it's going to, especially when it comes to the cards that have figures on them, like the quartz or some of the major arcana, it's going to do something for me. Now look at this Queen of Spades. Look at this Queen of Swords. Yeah. You know, and not every one of the human figured cards do the same thing. I don't really like this King of Swords so much, but yeah, this deck is going to take me places. It moves me. It moves my heart. Another deck, same ilk. Oh, and by the way, the Tarot of Reflections originally came out in 2005. The artist is Francesco Ciampi. It's a Lo Scarabeo deck. And interestingly, I'm realizing that this format, this thin format of these older Lo Scarabeo, it's the same size almost as the Fournier. But I think that this is thinner than a modern Lo Scarabeo. Okay, Spiral Tarot is also in number 2. It's a similar kind of ethereal deck. I discovered it this year actually at the Northwest Tarot Symposium. They had a free table. They always have a free table where people bring decks that they're getting rid of and take decks away. And a copy of the Spiral Tarot was on this free table. And I had seen Katie Flowers talk a number of times about the Spiral Tarot and how much she admired it. So, you know, and I'd seen other people say, oh, they hate the borders. And anyway, I picked it up. It was free. And it was like Tarot Reflections. I just kind of got drawn into the images right away. Again, it's not a perfect deck, but there's something about, especially some of the human figures in the majors and in the courts, where there's a kind of ethereal quality. And sometimes this is Kay Steventon, and it came out originally in 1998, US Games. This is a vintage version. The newer version, the blue is a slightly different blue on the back, and the cardstock isn't as nice. This was when US Games was still printing their decks through Carta Mundi in Belgium. So the cardstock is better. Look at this Justice figure with the peacock feathers. The deck I got on the free table was maddeningly missing one card. So then I was like on an eBay quest, not only to get another copy of it, but to get a vintage copy. So that's what I got. The Devil. Knight of Pentacles. People have complained about this deck for its mixture of styles. Like there's this sort of Victorian quality to some of the minors. And people have said, you know, look, the majors are unbelievable and sort of Greco-Roman and kind of mythological in their feeling. And then you've got this kind of mishmash. Oh, look at this Sun card in the minors. Or, you know, here, where it's just like, you know, 10 of Pentacles, all the generations, but there's something kind of corny about the mixing of historical styles, people have said. It doesn't bother me. Again, this is a deck that the minute I had it in my hand, it just took me to a different place. You know, when tarot can do that, let me see if I can find when tarot can do that, when it can take you to this dream world through the images, you know, you can be willing to put up with a three of Wands where suddenly we've got a woman in a bustle. I don't know. Or a 9 of Wands where we've got this kind of vaudevillian, Edwardian, I don't know, character. Here's the Magician. I mean, yeah. Dreamy. So that's the Spiral Tarot, Kay Steventon, originally came out in 1998. So my top 3 decks, my top number 2 decks, the 3 that are in, I'll insert titles so this is clear, in that place. I had the Tarot Reflections, I had Spiral Tarot, and now a 3rd honorable mention. This is a deck that was in my possession, but this year I fell for it in ways that I hadn't before, and that is the Medieval Scapini. It's a totally unique deck. Okay, so Scapini is the artist, Luigi Scapini is the artist who did the 3 missing cards for the US Games Visconti Sforza. And then he did this Medieval Scapini, where you can see how he was influenced by his own work for the Visconti Sforza with this kind of faux gold foil. This is a vintage version, by the way. The more modern versions, the coloring is off. The cardstock isn't as nice. Like the Spiral Tarot, like the Tarot of Reflections, what knocks me out with a deck like the Medieval Scapini is the delicacy and ethereal quality, the dreamy quality of so many of Scapini's artworks, pieces of art. And I'm trying to remember, I think that he's got a self-portrait in one of these cards, and maybe in the Emperor, or is that, oh no, it's Stuart Kaplan. And then Michael Dummett, who's the guy who wrote Game of Tarot and the historian behind the tarot, his image is in a bunch of these cards, like maybe, or not in a bunch of his cards, but in one of these cards, I think that might be Dummett in the Pope. Anyway, again, Scapini, like Kay Steventon, like Francesco Ciampi, these decks take me to a different world. Now, this is a very idiosyncratic deck, though, and when you get into the minor arcana, the meanings of the cards and the symbolism is not obvious. So although it's pip style, it's sort of, minimally illustrated pips, like Scapini's Shakespeare Tarot as well, which I also own. Although it's minimally illustrated pips, these aren't really, it's not a Marseille style deck, and it's not really Rider-Waite-Smith. And Ronald Decker's Art and Alchemy, the companion book that was written separately for this deck, is really essential for making sense of what Scapini's up to. So this deck is not a deck that's easy to read unless you're willing to just go intuitively or to do some study of your own. I don't use this deck much for reading. I use this deck for meditation, which means I draw cards and journal and fawn over them and put cards on my altar, but I don't use this deck to do regular spreads or draws. That said, I have kind of an ongoing desire to really study Decker's book, which isn't very long, and then to dive into really working with Scapini's artwork. It's just, there's nothing else like it. Okay, so we are now at my first choice for 2018, and it is the Tarot of the Spirit. Pamela Eakin's deck that she created with her mother, and that has been rocking my world. This is the US Games version. It's I just read someone's comment on my video, one of my videos about this deck, that they were sort of put off by how much it was like a Crowley Harris deck, the Tote deck or the Thoth deck. I feel like every time I refer to that deck, I have to call all its various names because we all pronounce it slightly differently. At any rate, they were put off by the sense that it was Tote-like in its symbolism, because the minors have this very Frida Heresy-like geometric artwork, and then they have titles, and some of those titles correspond to Crowley titles, but some do not. The quartz are sister, brother, mother, father, and in fact she sees sister as being kind of at the top of the hierarchy, because the way that Eakins puts this, each generation learns from the previous generation. So the children, in some ways, the child is the father to the man. The child has inherited the qualities of father and mother. So there are all sorts of idiosyncratic things that are not at all Rider-Waite-Smith and not at all Crowley Harris. And yet, you don't need to know what Eakin is up to when you see the imagery, of a card like Water Mother, right? That card kind of speaks right to you. And although she's deeply influenced by Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, and is thinking about the pathways of Kabbalah, and encouraging us to, in the 20th edition of this deck, which includes this transparency, encouraging us to see each card in relation to the Kabbalistic movement of spirit, from, you know, divine source into emanated creative incarnation. Although she's encouraging us to do that, you actually don't need to know the Kabbalah to work with these cards. The imagery is abstract, but her, without even reading her book, which is quite dense and I think is, it's hard to assimilate. I mean, it's not because it's too complicated, but it's just idiosyncratic. The Little White Book is actually excellent, and the meanings given for the cards is excellent. And I find that reading this deck with a kind of Rider-Waite-Smith, sort of little bit Pippish Tarot de Marseille sensibility, the deck reads beautifully. The you know, the keywords, the nadir for the Five of Earth, that's great. Five of Pentacles, the nadir, the bottoming out, sure, I see that. She also really helps us think through the progression of the minors from Ace to 10, and I think when you start working with the deck, it makes intuitive sense. But there's just something, oh, look at the Magus, the Magician card. There's just something, again, about this deck. It really has spoken to me, and it's been my top deck this year, the deck that really kind of busts me open this year, that I've been reaching for again and again, that I've been doing tarot pulse readings with almost every day. Yeah, Pamela Eakins, and it came out, when did I say, 98? Is that what I said? 92, US Games. Pamela Eakins, Tarot of the Spirit. The artwork is by her mother, Joyce Eakins. Brilliant deck. Brilliant deck, number one. And the Brady Tarot. I got this deck in October. I got onto the Kickstarter campaign late, but not too late to be one of the people who got the decks early on. But I gotta say, I got this deck and I knew that it would hurt my heart so much to own it that I left it untouched for all of October, all of November, most of December. One of the things about this deck that is so exquisite is Rachel Pollack's guidebook. And I just want to read you what she says about the Fool, what she says about natural history, and just the idea of a deck that isn't just using nature themes, but is really using nature, is really in touch with nature, where I think the tagline that Emmy Brady uses for this deck is, you know, where natural history meets the esoteric. But what is it, you know, what does it really mean to dive into nature? And Rachel Pollack, in her reading of The Fool, says, let me just show the Fool card here. And I'm not going to look at these cards too much because there are so many great reviews out there. So this is a, it's not a cuckoo bird, it's a cowbird chick being nursed by a bird that it's tricked into feeding it by being placed in the, as an egg, placed in the wrong nest. The Fool in old decks often appears as a kind of crazy homeless man moving through the world. In modern ones, we see a beautiful young prince beginning the journey of the cards. Here we see something still deeper, pure instinct, the flow of energy that carries life forward. The Fool is both a hunger and an equally instinctive need to feed, to nurture, even if it's someone else's chick. I love that the Fool is now in dialogue, right? The Fool isn't one figure, it's both of these. It's hunger and the need to nurture. That drive of life forward. I mean, it's actually making me choke up a little bit. So Rachel Pollack is, her book is incredible, and it is the perfect companion to what is, without doubt, one of the most beautifully produced, if not most beautifully produced deck of cards that I've ever encountered. The slightly rubberized feel of the cards, the matte gold on the side, which is perfect. The muslin covered foam insert the wood box that has its carving on it, and the exquisite wood block cuts. You know, Emmy Brady, printmaker, she wanted to really bring into the modern sensibility of woodblock art. She wanted to bring back that feel from the Marseille decks, from the earliest mass-produced decks, of what a woodblock tarot deck feels like. But look at it. I mean, just look at, you know, the brilliance of the line work and then the equally brilliant coloring. I'm probably, oh, I love this, The Magician. I am at the very start of my journey with this deck. I haven't done any readings with it yet. I've just held it, looked through the cards, read through Rachel Pollack's book, and just loved it up. It's one of those decks that, you know, you ever have decks where you're like, it just makes you almost weepy that you own it, and it's almost too hard to actually work with it. I guess this is probably why, when I can afford it, I get a backup copy. Anyway, so that's one of my other top tier #1 decks. And then, you know, I keep coming back to, The Wild Unknown. You know, this deck came out in 2012. I have every edition of it, and it keeps speaking to me. I mean, it's literally in me, on me, through me, and it's part of what it means for me to live in Oregon right now, that I have a deck by, not only by a Portland artist, and there are a number of incredible Portland artists, Portland, Oregon artists making incredible art, but this deck feels so freaking Pacific Northwest. Its natural sensibility, its relationship to conifers, I'm looking for the tower here, to wood. I can't imagine, to mountains. I can't imagine this deck being produced anywhere else in the world than in the Pacific Northwest. That said, you know, we certainly don't have a whole lot of thunderstorms in the Pacific Northwest, and there are no oceans in this deck. We don't have a bunch of lions in the Pacific Northwest, but you know, the tarot makes us live the world that we live. You know, the Emperor, a Doug fir. How could it not be? How could you not have a fir tree in the tower? Okay, so those are my top 5. Sorry, this was a very long video, and a top 5 that included many more than 5 decks. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, much love, and Happy New Year.